Empezamos con la siguiente conferencia, que es de Ángela Uttke. Ella es arquitecta especializada en urbanismo y planeamiento. Actualmente es profesora de la Universidad de Berlín y profesora adjunta en la Universidad de Michigan. Su investigación se centra en los procesos de participación en el diseño urbano y la construcción, con un especial interés en la ciudad como recurso educativo para niños y jóvenes. Es miembro fundador del Arquitectura Stadt, Asociación para la Educación en Arquitectura y la Participación de Niños y Jóvenes. Muchas gracias.
So, I'm going to talk in English. I have to admit, when I got the invitation half a year ago, I thought it would be a good reason for me to polish up my Spanish, because I was an Erasmus student a long time ago, 1 year. I studied in Valladolid. And my Spanish was quite fluent back then, so I thought, well, it's a good reason. As this event came closer, I said, well, maybe you do at least your slides in Spanish. Well, here I am. My slides are not in Spanish, they're in English. But I still hope you understand me and that you get a lot of ideas and impressions from my presentation. And I was asked to talk about architecture education in relation to public participation, to the participation of children and young people in actual planning and design processes. And this will be the focus of the projects I will be presenting. And these projects were all done by an organization that's called JAS, Jugendarchitekturstadt. It's a non-profit organization founded about 10 years ago. 11 years ago to be exact. And it's a network. It's a network of about 30 people now. We started off in the Ruhr area, being about 5 persons, working at the university, teaching university students, doing lectures for children, workshops for children, and then our colleagues walked up to us and said, well, are you bored by teaching our university students? Do you have too much time while you do this? And we said, okay, if you don't want it, we found our own association and we started doing these workshops, especially in the Ruhr area. By starting, we found a lot of people that were also interested in doing these projects. And we are now an interdisciplinary organization, having with us people that engage in the built environment, that engage in planning and designing it, which means we have urban planners, we have architects in the team, we have landscape architects, we have interior designers, social workers, we have museum pedagogues with us. So it's a very mixed team that is now doing JAS projects, and we spread it out all over Germany simply by people first moving away from the Ruhr area to other cities, because we got our PhDs, we got our new professions, and me, for example, I moved back to Berlin, and I got more people interested in this work, and so this network grows, and we don't have a permanent finance base, so we don't get money from the government to finance our works. Each project is financed by itself. We find the money by writing grants, by clients asking us to do projects. Our clients are mostly cities, housing associations that are holding a huge number of housing stocks, public and private ones, sometimes private companies like ThyssenKrupp that, for example, plan a new campus or a new kindergarten, and this is how we work. And from each project, we take 10% of the income and put it to a common fund. And this fund we use to organize some of our joint activities as JAS educators, for example, coming together every year at least once to learn about all the projects that are going on, to exchange on some experiences in teaching and doing participation projects, or financing students that work in our main office. Our headquarters is in Essen, which is in the Ruhr area, and we have 3 more headquarters, one in Hamburg, one in Berlin, and one in Munich right now. And these headquarters simply come into place by a bigger number of people being there in these cities and doing projects. The good thing about this construction is that every time we are bringing in really big projects, or we need to join forces, or we need to join references to get money, to get grant money, to get public money or private money to do a project, we can present ourselves as a big network that is not only consisting of 2 people or 3 people. We are 30, and if we are taking some of our university students, for example, I teach at the university and usually also try to involve my university students in these projects. We even have a larger number of people we can pull together to really do big projects. And yes, this is how we work. And we started off purely educational. I said it at the beginning, first we did lectures for children on architecture and planning. And then we started doing workshops very much on the basics of architecture, proportions, aesthetics, atmospheres of spaces, lights and shadows, and so on. That's how we started, and that's what we still do today. But what happened after 2 or 3 years, and the cities especially city administrations learned about our work, they asked us to come and do participation projects. They would say, we have this neighborhood planning going on and we want to engage young people and children, but we don't know how to do it. We want you to do it. Or we're planning to build a school and we want a participation process of the teachers and the children, and we want you to do it. And this is how we more and more, and I would say by now, at least 70% of our projects we do all over Germany are participation projects. And of course, we took the knowledge and the experience from our pure educational projects, how I call them, and incorporated them in our participation projects. And just to give you a better understanding where also why maybe these German cities and communities are asking us to come in to do this participation, and also what wide variety of planning and architecture tasks are out there where actually participation of children and young people is beneficial. I will start by that, and then later on we'll point out 4 projects and explain a little more in detail what we have done in different cities. So, if you really think of participation, of public participation in planning processes, and if you think of children participating in it, in the creation and formal planning of cities and buildings, of course, the scale of the building itself or the scale of a site that is used very heavily by children and young people is the first task you would think of. Yeah, here it makes sense to let children and young people participate. So kindergarten, youth centers, schools of any kind, playgrounds, any infrastructure where the main user are children and young people, actually, if you plan them today, it's somewhat expected to do some kind of youth and children participation. Which doesn't mean, by the way, that's my personal opinion, I can name you fantastic projects that were realized by wonderful designers and architects that didn't have any participation. So participation doesn't always lead to better results. At least it would be a wonderful PhD topic when you study it and prove it, that participation always leads to better results. I have my doubts, but nevertheless, mostly it does. That's what I think. So site building design, I think it's the most obvious a task of planning and design where children and young people should participate. Public space is another topic where it's very obvious to let children and young people participate in planning and designing them because they are the main users of these spaces. There is hardly any plaza where young people aren't hanging around and where we actually have trouble with this user group. Or they don't find spaces, public spaces where they are accepted. At least in Germany, this is an issue. So defining them, designing them is something where it makes very much sense to let them participate. Nevertheless, at this scale of planning, we have legal binding plans, we call them, which are really defining building heights and so on, building ratios and stuff like that. And even there, we have a building law that says everybody has to have a chance to participate in that scale of planning. And this, some cities take that very seriously and say, yes, we also, in certain spaces, want children, young people to participate in these legal binding planning processes, which are quite complicated and hard to understand. Another thing, I'm coming to the neighborhood scale, where we have, for example, a whole city quarter or a whole neighborhood that needs to be redeveloped. We have any bigger public investments in Germany, you cannot do, or the state won't give money for it to help the cities to do it, without the cities doing an integrated neighborhood plan. So they are obligated to do these integrated neighborhood plans to get federal money, state money, and especially if you have socially deprived neighborhoods, neighborhoods in need with a high unemployment rate, with a high rate of immigrations, integration problems, and so on. To get any help from the state to deal with these neighborhoods, you have to have a neighborhood integrated plan, an action plan, or other master plans where we have neighborhoods that have urban design problems simply and need to be qualified. So this is another thing where children and young people are asked for, because the neighborhood level is where they mostly, especially the older kids, is where they live, where they act, where they go to school, where they're using the ways to get to their activities and so on. And the last scale planning is very interesting, and here, or very active. This is a city and regional planning scale, and here it's getting very abstract already, because here in Germany, cities have to define land use plans, and these are city vision plans for the next 20 years. So here the cities strive, of course, to have a wider participation from the public and also from the children and young people, but yet it is quite abstract to think of a city in the future, or to get interested in discussing the city of the future within the next year or within the next 20 years, especially since you especially young people, wonder, what does it have to do with me? And this is maybe where I want to point out these other points that are on the slide that say mobility, demographic change, public transportation, cycle paths, networks, because especially the last one, these are the concrete themes young people are interested in. So our experience is, if you ask them, you want to participate in a land use planning? They say, oh, that's really sexy. No, they don't. But if we say it's about public transportation, they say yes, that's of interest, because young people are the ones, at least in Germany, that are the heaviest users of our public transportation. Cycle path networks, this is something they're interested in. Greenways, connections, using of green parks, and so on, that's something they are interested in. So in each level of these planning scales and instruments, at the end you have to break it down to the needs and interests of young people and children to actually get their interest in participating. It's much easier, of course, if you are on the level of a site design, if you are in architectural design, designing spaces that are dedicated to them. It's getting, well, public space design, I think, is also much easier. It's when you're designing streets, designing plazas, and so on, to get this user group involved and to make them understand it makes sense. They can relate to that very easily. Neighborhood planning, it gets a little complicated already, because here we are on the scale of a whole city quarter. And maybe it's not quite understandable why this urban renewal plan needs the voice of children and young people, so you really have to break it down to topics that are interested to them again, sports facilities, playgrounds, recreation areas, and so on. And like I said, the hardest I think the hardest part of letting children, young people participate is city and regional planning, because it is a rather abstract way of planning. Sometimes these planning phases, like to get the plan done, you need at least a year or two. That's far too long for kids and young people. Actually, I don't know any successful, really interesting project in Germany right now that successfully really integrated young people and children into that process. If you know one, let me know. I already pointed out some of the challenges. It is, after all, if you go into official planning, if you go into architectural planning, very demanding and a complex nature, because suddenly children, young people are confronted not only with their own needs, but there are also other interest groups. And so this is very demanding for them. Some of these goals, planning and design, is defining the programming we are doing as professionals, and asking children and young people to be part in this is quite abstract. And we really need to break it down. Planning processes are way too long for children and young people. So we always have to think of intermediate results. This is something we learned. I cannot tell the kids, you know, your vision for the city, it will be realized in 30 years. That's just nothing a kid will understand. We have to have a result now. The phase of these results can be very different. I will show some examples. There is a huge gap between planning as it is done right now and implementation. I can name you various planning projects who never went into implementation. And you have done all these public participation processes, including young people and children, but never implemented. And these kids and young people will remember that they developed all these ideas, but they never got implemented. And the next time you ask them to be part of it, they may say, why should I? So you really have to think how to bridge that gap. We fail to reach children and young people in participation. And I'm not talking about these kids where parents are also interested in planning and architecture and send their kids to participation of projects. No, I'm talking about these kids that would never show up in these workshops. None of their parents would ever enroll them in these workshops. So a huge topic is, how do we make the voices heard that are very silent and never get voiced? And to keep the children attracted, I already mentioned some of these planning processes are very long and very demanding. And how do I keep a kid, how do I keep a young person interested to be part of it, to come again week by week to participate in these planning processes? And after all, if you look into municipalities, if you look into architectural firms that are building, that are planning, designing, a lot of them are very unsure and simply don't know how to work with children and how to let them participate. So that's another gap, another challenge that's out there in practice. Nevertheless, I think architecture education is something to offset some of these challenges, to work with some of these challenges. You see here the BEE, it means Built Environment Education. I usually, when I talk in Germany, avoid the term architectural education because it includes a lot of people that are also very active in the field of built environment education. Usually planners don't feel included, and usually landscape architects also don't feel included, at least in Germany. Environmental planners are not included, and so on. So I usually talk about built environment education. If you go out and inform yourself what's out there in the world and look also in academic literature, you will find both terms, architecture education and built environment education. And I think, like I said, I think built environment education can offset some of these challenges I just pointed out, because it does give the kids a basic understanding of architecture and design. design processes, of planning processes. It gives them skills like model building, like drawing skills, preparing them for voicing their opinion, and so on. So they learn already something they then can use in very demanding participation projects. They learn how to be analytical, how to be conceptual. They learn some of the methods, of course. They have experienced some of the methods we are using. They learn about stakeholders of opinion, of other peoples. They learn about their rights and responsibilities. I just remember the lecture this morning on the Romanian example, showing that of course, as we design, there's also a whole world behind it of interests and rights and responsibilities and rules and regulations. So they get in touch with that. And so I strongly believe that participation is tough. It's nothing you just do, not if it's to be meaningful. And some of them, if you are doing a child initiated or youth initiated project, the kids themselves initiate the project. Of course you need some skills. You cannot do that without having some competency, some knowledge. So for these different steps for this of participation, this ladder of participation defined by Roger Hart a long time ago, the kids need different skills. I cannot tell you what skills. That would be another, by the way, very interesting topic for research. But for sure, it does need competencies, it does need skills, and you need different skills when you initiate your own projects versus you just being informed. Which would be the letter, the lowest letter. And built environment education, I think, is a way to hold the ladder. It's a way to give them, assisting the kids in these participation projects. And also, I think, participation projects benefit from educational processes. Every participation, that's my true belief, should be an educational process. If kids and young people go out of public participation without having learned anything, then I think something went wrong. Our reverse, by the way, also, if the planners and architects and the city officials didn't learn anything, then also something went wrong. So this is maybe a little abstract and maybe a little theoretical. So I think the four projects I'm presenting gives you a better idea what it could look like, such a participation process, and how we used, and you will see some methods other colleagues have presented today too, how we incorporated them in a planning process. And like I said, I haven't, unfortunately, any good example on the city and regional planning level. And I really, if you ever do a great project in that scale, please let me know. But I do have a project on a neighborhood level. It's an integrated neighborhood development plan that was done in Aachen that I will show as an example. We have a redesign project of the Karl Marx Plaza, was done in Berlin, so we would be more in the public space design. We have a public park and sports ground redesign project in Berlin, again, which is also, I would say, at the public space design, but also you will see that the result was more on the street furniture design level. And last but not least, the site and building design level, where I will show you the project of the youth meeting point in Greven, a small town of 10,000 people in close to the Ruhr area. So these projects I will walk you through. Let's start with the integrated neighborhood development plan, who was done in the city of Aachen for a city quarter called Zürmond Quarter. And actually, my planning firm was given the contract to do this integrated neighborhood development plan, to do an urban design study for it. And it was us proposing the city, why don't you incorporate it, the students and the schools especially that were in that area. They had 3 schools in that neighborhood, and we said it would make sense, if you talk about the future of this neighborhood, to integrate the voices of these young people. The city said, oops, we don't really have money for that. And this was a good coincidence that the national program by the Ministry for Transportation and Planning and Construction was launched. It's called Young People in Neighborhoods and was financing public participation of young people in city planning. They wanted to test different methods, they wanted to have experimental approaches because they were not happy with the practice of youth participation in Germany right now. And we were applying for that funding together with the city of Aachen as in partnership, and we were lucky to get it. And this is basically how this project was financed. And we got, as a further partner, we got a professional photographer to be part in the project. And we selected one school, the students of a vocational school, or we got them to be partner on us, to be working with us. You know yourself how hard it is to get people engaged in these projects, to get the schools or any other partners convinced to be part in these projects, and the vocational school was saying that they would be very happy to work with us. What did we do? The kids in these schools were between 14 and 16 years old. They were going for training to be in different careers. They came from all over the city actually to visit this school. So some of them lived in the area, most of them were outsiders, but actually there was a good combination. And the challenge was they never had any architecture education before. Well, they maybe learned about architectural styles in arts education, but other than that, they didn't have any workshops before. So, of course, we needed to get their interest, and we worked a lot with the media. Young people love to work with doing videos, photos. We took them around the neighborhood, talked about different spaces, and we did this by carrying around a suitcase that indicated spaces that were working, that were interesting, indicated spaces that are no-go, that are not working well, and the kids were taping statements and presenting them to their classmates and inspiring discussions on things in the neighborhood. By doing this, sometimes we have problems when we do participation because people tend to have a rather negative image, a negative view of their neighborhood. They rather complain about everything and don't see the beauty they may have. So an exercise we do in that case, we didn't do it in Aachen, we did it in another place, is that we give them paintings. Go wild, just pick any painting and ask them to go around the neighborhood to find spaces that are re-imaging what the painting is showing in atmosphere, in composition, in colors, whatever they get inspired by. This exercise is very good because they search for at the end they search for hidden qualities. They don't notice it, but at the end they search for hidden qualities in the neighborhoods. And they also challenge their own views of the city by finding beauty in spaces that may have never seen before, seeing details they've never seen before, and maybe finding at the end their neighborhood suddenly really interesting and something where you could, qualities you could build upon, and you could discuss the findings by placing then the paintings on a map and by discussing the spatial qualities and the spatial findings of these places. This is a picture actually done in Venice at a workshop. But coming back to Aachen, after going around the neighborhood, identifying spaces with qualities, with hidden qualities, spaces that need of change, or in need of change, we decided to focus on these spaces in need, and we do, of course, collages with ideas, developing ideas in different formats. And at a certain point, we usually try to inspire the young people by trying out some of these ideas. And a big discussion was about the streets and the traffic on the streets, and how to redirect some of the traffic to, at the end, create more qualities for plazas right next to it, for example, or to use a street that is hardly used by traffic for different uses, for example, for an extended playground or schoolyard. And we got the city, because of course they had to work with us, they brought money in with us together. We got them to close down a street for a day to give us the chance to do the workshop on the street, to do another workshop on the street with these young people, to develop some of these ideas, to discuss some of these ideas a step farther, a step deeper, and to somehow also summarize up what would be the focus of their message that they wanted to put in the integrated neighborhood development plan. And of course, at that stage, we could have just written up what we found out, what the kids have proposed. But like I said, the catch is that the neighborhood plan will be implemented in a time period between the next 3 years and the next 15 years, something like that. Usually they have short-term actions and long-term actions. So we needed a result. And the result was that we did a photo shooting and did a postcard set that was distributed throughout the city, showing the ideas of the young people for different spaces in the neighborhood. Another thing was a billboard campaign, a temporary result basically of participation, a billboard campaign showing their ideas for spaces at these locations when there was a billboard, but also all over the neighborhood, all over the city. I had the chance to talk to one of the city officials, asking her, so after 5 years, did they ever implement one of these ideas? And she said, yes, one plaza did incorporate the ideas the kids formulated. And for sure, none of these kids probably is still around. I mean, it's 5 years ago, they finished school, they may be off, they may be not even in the city anymore. Nevertheless, to them, the result of this participation process was the billboard campaign, was the postcards as a temporary result that somehow made an ending to their participation process, but their ideas carried on much later. And this brings me to my second project. It's the redesign of a Karl-Marx Plaza in Berlin-Neukölln. The whole project was financed by the Karl-Marx Straße Redevelopment Program. It's a grant the city of Berlin brought in by the state, by the national money from the building and traffic building and planning ministry, and they took part of this money to finance youth participation in the redevelopment of this whole area. And right next to the Karl-Marx Street was this Karl-Marx Plaza. And this is a project where we have been long cooperating with a school close by. And this year they said, okay, let's be part of the Karl-Marx Straße redevelopment program. And they asked us to do a participatory design with students or with high school students for the Karl-Marx Plaza. And since I'm also working at the university and teaching future planners, designers, and architects about architecture education for children and about public participation, I always use my classes and my studios to incorporate projects like that, to get the students involved. And I found out after a few projects that it's great to do that, because if you let them prepare these workshops, if you let them be an active part of the workshop, these university students not only have a far better way of working with teenagers, because when I show up, I'm still professor, I'm still the old lady talking to young people, and I'm not a cool person, you know? But the university students, they are cool, and they talk the same language as these young people. as these teenagers. So we found out that if the workshop is prepared very well, we almost could disappear. We're only in the background helping out if it's really getting troubles. But mostly the university students were able to carry out the whole participation process and working with these high school students on a very, very direct base and coming up with wonderful results. This was one of these projects. I had 12 students coming from different master programs, from architecture, landscape planning, and city planning, attending a class, and I took them to do a workshop with 28 high school students from a secondary school, and we prepared together a 5-day workshop. I talked to them a lot about architecture education, about methods, about my experiences in participation. They come up with a concept for the workshop. Of course, I have my influences, and I'm still tutoring them, but they do a lot of the preparation work. Then, in this case, we decided not to collect the ideas of young people, but to make the young people part of a planning process themselves, make them, I would say, give them the role of designers and planners, incorporating the ideas of other people. And we called it Game It Up, and the aim was to develop a game that gives the students the chance to plan the area by getting voices of other people, of other users of this space. And we did first a game testing. We brought in all kinds of games we knew, and we played different games with them for a morning, let's say for 2 hours, something like that. And then we decided together with these high school students what game we are gonna develop in order to plan and redesign a space. And of course we did first a space analysis, understanding the plaza we are planning, or we're doing the game for, the participation game for. We analyzed what users we had, and they decided to do some kind of a role play game where we have different users that have to voice their demand, and then at the end you have to negotiate these different demands and bring them together in one design. And here again, us as as lecturers from the universities, we could stay in the background, and the students and high school students, university students were working very closely together. At this picture, you probably can tell who is a university student and who is a high school student, but they were like team members on eye level, and that's another challenge of public participation, to get on eye level with the participants. And like I said, university students were very successful in getting on eye level with young people. And here they creating the game, here the game design, different cards, they were writing the cards, they were doing the drawings. And of course, if you do a planning game, a design game, you have to test it, you have to play it, and you have to go out there and get the public engaged in playing it. And we got the students together at the market day. This plaza once a week is a market day. And they played the game on the plaza with people that went by, collecting the ideas, writing down the ideas. So at the end, they gave to the Karl-Marx-Straßen redevelopment team a brief saying or summarizing up what will be the design needs for this plaza. And this could be a brief for any designer to redesign the plaza. Yeah, this brings me to my next project, which again deals with public spaces. In this case, it's a public park and a sports ground redesign. And it's a project that is part of a far bigger program, where sometimes it is very good if you're a big network, because we were able, as a big network of YAS, of being spread out all over Germany, to bring in a grant by the Ministry for Education and Research of nearly €1 million to finance activities over a period of 5 years in 3 cities. And the aim was to have a period of time to work in deprived neighborhoods, in public spaces, to build up networks for local education, and to redesign public spaces with children and young people. And we wrote this grant basically by putting all the strengths of YAS together, all our locations together, by showing that we're having manpower that can do such a huge project. And now we do one project per year in each region. The regions are Hamburg, the Ruhr area, and Berlin. We have joint workshops where we come together, all the educators from this region, we exchange, we somehow see how the concepts come together. And we also do an evaluation of what we do. And you will experience it yourself. You do one project after another, one course after another, but you never have time to really reflect if the things you're doing work and if it's really meaningful what you're doing. So this was for us a big chance to really also have this deep reflection about what we're doing. The project, it's called Hingucker. Have a closer look, I would translate it. And it's a logo that's common and at all the projects over Germany that are part of these set of this program. The approaches in the different regions and cities are very different because we very much relate to the needs of the neighborhoods we're working in. And also the results are very different. It could be, in one case, a gardening project at the end that is enhancing public space, building street furniture, working with older kids, working with younger kids. It all depends on what the location, what the needs of the neighborhood is. Nevertheless, we're trying to join experiences, to reflect joint experiences, and also to help out if we feel like we need more manpower in one location or the others. And one common thing is basically the branding of all these projects. It's the logo that you can find in Hamburg, in Berlin, in the Ruhr area, placed on these projects, placed on these campaigns to be recognized. In Berlin, we work for 3 years now in the Soldina-Kiez, one area. And this year, or last year, 2015, the task was to be part of the redesign of a sports ground and public park. We started this whole project by reaching especially the older kids, the young people. We failed when it comes to that. We have rather the younger ones, rather 7 to 10 years old. The older ones show up when the big machines, when the big building machines, when the big tools come out. Then suddenly the bigger kids show up. But that's also one thing to say. If you do walk in workshops, if you want to get people freely to attend your workshops and you want the older kids, if you have the smaller ones, the older ones won't come because it's so uncool to work with the smaller kids. But what you do, sending away the small kids? No, you don't. So it's something we haven't found a solution yet. Here in Berlin, we started off with building models, using pizza cases as a base to give it the same size, the same playground of thinking. We then did model building of the object that is to be built, or the main idea that we discussed with the kids before, bringing together all the different ideas and somehow voted on the best one the kids wanted to take and develop further. And this was a model building workshop. The challenge of these walk-in workshops is also that you never have the same kids. You may have 1 or 2 people that have been there the last time, but then they don't show up the second time. They may only show up the third time again. So that's another challenge you kind of have to react. So you always have to find a place to pick up the ones that haven't been there before. Model building and then the real building of the object. Here we got help from carpenters that came in to work with the kids. We had also university students assisting. And this was the place where at least the big machines, the big tools came in, and also the older kids came to be part of the building process. And that's the object at the end that got built to be placed, to be part of the redesign of the sports ground. There was a big party at the end, opening up of the whole new sports ground, we got huge publicity for this project. And like I said, once a year we would get together, all the YAS educators that were part of Hingucker, and we're reflecting. This year it was very important to be reflecting because it was halftime. And one reflection, one big discussion we had, this was actually the poster we put up for getting kids interested. And if you noticed what came out, it's kind of like, And the biggest discussion we had in our evaluation workshop is being aware of your influence as professionals, of course. You are professionals in planning and design. You have your own opinion, you have your own feeling for aesthetics and so on. And when is the time to really play these professional design thinking in a participation process? And when it's all right to step back totally and take the ideas of children one-to-one and place them into space. This is we called it then a very refined design, professionally refined design, clear. And I can show you projects that were not professionally refined. I think both ways or both things are important, but I think one has to reflect, if you do public participation, how much you're influencing the product. And like I said, we had really fierce discussion about how did it happen that at the end it looked almost the same like we planned on. No, we didn't plan it. It's just, I don't know. So big discussions, and this was a reflection workshop. We put in a whole day of reflecting of what was happening last year in these different workshops all over Germany to find out where do we have to get better, where do we have to be more cautious about our thinking, and so on. And this brings me, like I said, to a last project that wasn't refined, but was a key project to my whole career in thinking of architecture education and in public participation or the participation of children and young people. It's an old project by now. It's been done 2008 to 2009. And it was working with two teenager groups. We call them cliques or gangs, however you want to call them. One was a rather middle-class kids group of youngsters riding dirt bicycles, and they wanted to realize a dirt bicycle area where they can train. And the other group were German-Russian kids. After the wall came down, there is a German minority living in Russia, and they were granted the permission to return to Germany. And of course, a lot of them used the chance to return, but meaning they may be third generations not talking German anymore and be having more Russian culture than the German culture. Nevertheless, in some cities there are a large part of the population now, and these kids were rather the kind of hanging around, drinking, having fun. And the city of Graven has a very forward-thinking youth department. They were seeing the need of giving these kids a space where they can actually be, riding their dirt bicycles, hanging around. The catch was that these two groups would have never dreamed to be even close to each other. But they were given the same space in the city by the city government, saying you can have that space if you come up with a good plan. And this is when the youth department called up YAS, asking us to come in to work with these kids. And we said, yeah, of course we do. At this point, I wasn't quite sure what I got into, because I knew that I would never have gone through this whole participation process, this whole participatory design process, without the street workers being with us, knowing these kids, and helping us to handle these kids. We did with them a site evaluation. That's how we started, looking at ownership, land use regulation, because at the end it was about building really something. Building codes, neighboring uses, trouble we could run into it, to do a workshop to come up with a site design, simply a spatial division of the site. That was the aim of the workshop. The workshop started that the street workers, well, the kids didn't show up. The middle class kids were there, but the others not. But the street workers knew where to get them, so they went home to them and got them out of bed to be at the workshop. And here you can see two middle-class kids working with one of the Russian boys, having really strong arguments about the site planning, who gets which space on the site, we did presentations in between where they had to kind of like present their ideas, because in the afternoon of this workshop, city officials would came, and they had to be convinced by these young people that they can do this project, that they can actually build, manage, and use this project. So we did not only do a site design with them, we also trained them. Because I don't know if you ever did use projects before that went into implementation. Usually you meet a lot of city officials that are very prejudiced and saying these young people are only troublemakers and they cannot do anything, and at the end you only will have trash everywhere, and this is not going to work. So we needed to train these kids not only to present their, like do these plans, but also present these ideas, be prepared for critical questions, for critical comments, and learning how to react to these maybe sometimes really hard questions. And at one point we thought, okay, this is not gonna work, but at the end they made it and came up with a convincing presentation where the city officials, you can see these guys in the red shirts, gray-haired, being convinced at the end that they can do it. And this is when we then started the real architectural design workshop. So we came in for a second workshop, and the kids had the idea, we're just gonna go to the home improvement market, buy one of these sheds and build them up. That was their idea. And what we did with them is then explore needs, explore things that such a site really, or such a building has to deal with. It has to deal with maybe vandalism, maybe in 2 years the kids are gone and new kids are there, things like that. We discussed with them, and so they found out, okay, maybe we need something different at the end. We showed them different projects to get them inspired, and at the end this was the result. They built themselves, the city got heavy machines to do the ramps, and both of them agreed to do the containers, and one dad of one of the Russian kids worked for a company that had these containers and was able to sponsor one of the containers, and we only had to buy one of them, and one was sponsored. And these were basically sitting side by side. There was a neutral space between that was very important, that was neutral. And this was the result of the project. And you see the design is not very refined. It's handmade, it's self-made, and it's okay. I mean, it's okay. It's here, it's the right side for this design. Nevertheless, 2 years later, this happens. Of course, we didn't know about it. We got a call from the street workers. One of the street workers now was heading the youth department, and he called us up and said, you have to come in again. And we said, yeah, sure, we come. And so we got our car full of boxes and all the materials you usually need for your workshops. You know better than me what we all need. And we came there full with our car and met these kids again. Here, the Russian kids, that's their site that got burned down. Of course, nobody was it, and they don't know who did it. And by then, after 2 years, out of 7 kids, only 2 were actually there that we knew. All the other 5 were new to the gang or to the clique. And we were preparing. Of course, we had the whole in mind what workshop we're going to do. But they said, we came and they said, we prepared something. And they put down a map, they put down a plan, saying, we reflected what didn't work well on this object, on this building before, and all together we designed this. So if you ever ask yourself if education, or if these kids are learning something in participation, this was my point when I knew they learned something. And we talk about kids that I think half of them never made it through high school. But nevertheless, they learned a lot in that project. And they even taught each other, because, like I said, only 2 of them were part of the whole workshops before. The others were new. And they did a good plan. And actually, that's how it is now. We got a carpenter to help us again. But the kids did a lot. They said it has to look better. We need more site planning around, because we always took all the dirt into the container. So they really did evaluate the situation before, learn from the planning process, and came up with a site design themselves. And I think that's basically my key message. Participation, public participation, has to be that way. At the end, people have to go out there and they have to have learned something. And this shows me that this actually can work. And I think a lot of methods we are using in built environment education, we are using in architecture education, are perfect to enhance and qualify public participation processes, make them more meaningful, make them more interesting, make them more educational, and make them more fun. That's also a very important message I want to give you. That's it.